autumn morning in upstate New York, the Earth yields the victims of a savage world war waged more than 200 years ago. Half a world away, dense jungle guards secrets of soldiers gone, but not forgotten. Today, a new breed of forensic detectives pieces together their terrible final hours in ways never before possible. How these people lived and died is written in their bones. After long years of lying silent, they begin to tell these soldiers' stories. As the ancients have said, the war is not over as long as the last slain soldier remains unburied. Although the unknown soldiers that lie here are in fact buried, no families were ever notified, no loved ones ever appeared by the grave. Who these people were, the pain and fear they suffered, how they died, all these mysteries are sealed forever beneath impenetrable marble slabs. Today, thanks to modern science, no one in the United States military need ever again become an unknown. During Operation Desert Storm in 1990, for the first time in history, the identity of two servicemen was established by extracting DNA from their shattered remains and matching it against the DNA of living relatives, a costly and difficult process. Now, to more easily trace the names of war casualties, blood is taken at recruitment to predetermine each person's DNA pattern, as unique as their fingerprints. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is the blueprint of life. The chemical essence of genes, it exists in all cells of the body and carries the information for eye color, race, height, and other traits. Today, the technology to decipher DNA is so precise that recruits go off to war with a kind of genetic dog tag on file with the government. Hundreds of samples a year arrive at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology outside Washington, D.C.
How are you?
The laboratory, which is the largest of its type in the world, processes and stores the genetic material. A computer checks name and social security number and prints labels for each packet. Maintained under tight security, the data may not be released except by court order. More than 1 million samples are already placed in deep freeze, each representing a unique human being. Deputy Program Manager is James Canick.
For those who have ever visited Arlington or any military cemetery, probably one of the most moving things is to see a grave that doesn't have a name on it. And of course the inscription reads, "Here lies in honored glory an American service member known but to God." And we hope that in our little operation that we have here, that we will preclude that from ever happening again.
The first major war in which Americans fought and died was more than a decade before the War of Independence. The tranquil region now known as Lake George, New York, was the scene of some of history's bloodiest fighting. In 1754, France and England clashed in a mighty struggle for control of North America. The brutal French and Indian War raged for 9 years and spread to every country where Britain and France had territorial interests. It has been called the First True World War. By 1763, with the French thoroughly defeated, the English ruled most of North America, including the 13 colonies. A strategic British outpost during the war was Fort William Henry. In the 1950s, the site was developed as a tourist attraction. Excavations of the old fort guided architects during reconstruction. While digging, scientists stumbled on an undisturbed burial ground. Today, a team of anthropologists and volunteers begin to piece together the story of how these soldiers lived and died. What they unearth is one of the most gruesome stories in the annals of war. Forensic anthropologist Mariah Liston first began working with the Fort William Henry burials in 1993. Her colleague, Brenda Baker, has worked with her since the beginning of the project. Liston and Baker know from patterns in the earth that they guaranteed to find burials here.
This is the outline of one of the rectangular grave shafts. It extends from that corner to the head would be right here. We can tell it's a grave shaft because the disturbed soil from digging this hole has been thrown back in, and we get this mottled coloration that contrasts very strongly with the undisturbed sand in this area.
Over the course of 10 days, mounting excitement is tempered by the patience and precision for which every anthropologist is trained. As they carefully remove the earth within the grave shafts, the top of a skull finally emerges.
I think this is really one of the most exciting parts of this, because this is the first time this person has been seen since he was laid to rest, and you get an idea as you uncover his face of something about what he looked like and who he was.
Slowly, the extent of the find becomes evident. Remarkably, the skeleton seems intact.
When we first discover something new, some specific bit of information we haven't had before, it's exciting to have another piece of the picture, and to know that we're filling out the puzzle a little bit more with each of these discoveries. So I often wonder what happened to their families. Did the families ever learn that these men had died, or what they died from, and who they left behind? Many of them probably had wives and children in other places. They're all pretty young. They're as young as about 14 or 15 up to early 20s, most of them. A few that are a little bit older, and they're late teens and early 20s.
Before the skeleton is removed for preservation and study, Liston carefully documents its exact position. Even now, she begins to recognize the telltale signs of a vicious war etched in these bones.
It looks like this is one of the soldiers that has been doing a lot of really heavy labor. There's a lot of wear and tear on all of his joints.
The muscles in his back had torn from the soldier's bones under the constant stress of carrying heavy loads, and his ribs became fused to the vertebrae. He must have been in constant pain. If left exposed to the elements, the bones would deteriorate over time. Working well into the night, the team removes and labels each bone fragment to take to the lab.
I'm suspicious about this break in the back of the skull. It looks like something that may have happened while the bone was still fresh. Could easily be what killed it. Space is not coming away.
As the fragile skull is pulled from the earth, the bones crumble. The skull apparently was crushed by the weight of the soil.
What a shame. It's this bad fracture here on the bottom, too, that comes across and gets out of that as well.
I may be able to see something a little bit more clear before we get that all cleaned up.
Two small buttons are found with the skeleton. They appear to be military, but the team can't be sure until they've been removed. One was found in the pelvic cavity of the skeleton, and the other seems to be attached to an unidentified material.
And it looks like it's attached to either leather, or it may very well be part of his skin. Copper often preserves organic tissue very well.
American militia fought alongside the British at Fort William Henry. Items like buttons and fabric may provide clues to rank and nationality. Painstaking work, cleaning, sorting, and documenting the remains will take more than a dozen people weeks to complete.
So this is probably where this other one, these two were down, they dropped down into the pelvic cavity. This one was right down in the hip socket.
Some artifacts found with the bodies can be identified. Others remain a mystery. But many of the pieces in this detective story finally begin to take form. Far more than a pile of bones, a young soldier has emerged from the depths with a story he waited centuries to tell.
Yeah, this is
2 weeks into the excavation, as winter closes in, one complete burial has been unearthed, and several others are still being excavated. The team's task now is to try to read the life history that is written in the bones.
The first thing that we can do is take a look at the skull and some of the features on the skull that indicate he's a male. If you look at the area over his eye orbits, you see that it's fairly well developed, and there are brow ridges essentially there, and that's a feature that you find in men. Women's foreheads tend to be a little bit higher. This one slopes back a bit, so that's an indication that this is a man. This is his jaw, his lower jaw, and you can see it's very large and robust, and his chin is extremely square, and this is another feature of a male.
Next, they must determine the person's age at death.
And if you look at the ends of his bones in his arms and legs, you can see that they're completely fused together. In younger individuals, you would see separate caps at the ends of the bones. And because those caps have fused on, we know that he's at least more than about 18 years old. We can see that his molars are all completely erupted here, including his wisdom tooth. And that usually erupts when you're about 18 to 21 years old. So again, another indicator that he's an adult male.
Many other questions remain. What was life at Fort William Henry like for this man? What was the condition of his health?
Most of the younger individuals had very severe arthritis. The only place where he has any significant arthritis is here in his right elbow. And this is the forearm. This is the bone where it hooks over your upper arm and allows you to move it back and forth like that. And if you compare the right elbow to the left elbow, you can see how much rougher this surface is here on the right. So this means he had a lot more action in his right arm. And because of the arthritis showing up just in his right elbow, it suggests that he's a right-handed man. We have another clue that he was right-handed because he's got wear on some of his teeth on his lower jaw, and you can see it's beveled right on these cusp surfaces here. So he's probably clenching a pipe over on the left side of his jaw, and that's what would have caused that kind of strange wear pattern on his lower teeth. And because he was clenching that on the left side of his jaw, he was probably right-handed. You would put the pipe in the left side of your mouth and use your left hand to take the pipe in and out.
The French and Indian War was fierce and long. Yet the soldier's most constant enemy was not a bullet, but disease. Smallpox, influenza, and tuberculosis ran rampant.
This group of skeletons is more sickly, in worse shape than anything I've ever worked with. I've looked at people as old as about 3,000 years old and more modern populations as well, and yet this is the most diseased group. They've got the most injuries all the way around. There's more pathology here than anything.
Although more soldiers died from disease than war-related injuries, the battle picture that emerges becomes increasingly grim.
This soldier is an example of one that was shot. There's this depression that caused the bone to be crushed here, and another one at the top of the bone here. You can actually see the rounded depression of the musket ball. A lot of the soldiers that we found died from blows to the head. Here, something struck the soldier and punctured the bone, forcing fragments inside the skull and also fracturing it here down toward his eye and also running back toward the back of the skull.
Diaries reveal that as the French attacked Fort William Henry, the British simply surrendered, too sick with smallpox to fight back. Then, without warning, a group of Indians allied to the French attacked and slaughtered the ill and injured men. The event was central to the novel The Last of the Mohicans, long thought to be an exaggerated account. If anything, it turns out it was an understatement.
In studying these skeletons, we have found extensive evidence of this massacre, documenting the fact that atrocities were committed. We know that there were mutilations and massacres on both sides. As part of this war, everyone was participating in this. This soldier was one that was beheaded, and we have the account of a French priest who saw the beginning of the massacre, describing one of the native allies of the French coming out of the casemates, which were the hospitals at the fort, and carrying the head of his victim. Buried underneath the floor of the casemates, there was a mass grave of massacre victims, and this individual was indeed beheaded. In the neck bone that we have here, there are a number of cuts slicing across the bone, and a final one all the way through the bone here across the top. And so we're fairly certain that this is the individual who was beheaded that the priest saw.
The bones found inside the fort tell the story of the quick and ferocious attack.
As part of the massacre, part of the picture we've been able to reconstruct is that there were mutilations on the body, and this included genital mutilations. There are cuts on the front of the pelvis in the area of the genitals. In addition, we think some of the individuals were disemboweled, and there are cuts going all the way through the region of the stomach and abdomen into the backbone behind the abdomen. And we have here a number of cut marks and damage to the bone from that incident.
Today, forensic science reveals much about the hardships with which these young men lived, the horrors they suffered, and the savage ways in which many died. It can create a picture of a soldier who was over 18 and right-handed, a man who smoked a pipe, which he probably held in his left hand, a strong man who spent his days doing a lot of heavy lifting, his arms and legs free of arthritis, but his back in constant pain. His bones and those of his fallen comrades tell us much much about what these soldiers' lives were like. But we can never know their names. Forever anonymous, they belong to the ages. In 1861, passions deeply felt over slavery brought the young American nation into a convulsive civil war. North against South, brother against brother, they fought for 4 bitter years. When the terrible trial by fire and sword came to an end, more than 600,000 boys and young men had died. The National Museum of Health and Medicine in Washington, D.C. was established in 1862 for record-keeping and follow-up care of the wounded. Here, Paul Sledzik has studied more than 2,000 bones of Civil War casualties. Although bone may appear rock solid, in actuality, it changes over one's lifetime, even over the course of a few days, in response to exercise, wear and tear, and disease.
Bone is like any other organ system in the body. It's constantly replenishing its cells and changing the cells within it. One of the changes that we can pick up in the bone that's interesting because it gets at what activities the soldiers were doing are these changes in the upper part of the humerus. This is the humerus or the upper arm bone from the Civil War soldier, and this defect here, this etched area in the bone, is indicative of heavy muscle activity of the upper arm, probably lifting the 15 to 20 pound rifles and firing them, and digging with picks and axes.
The bones also tell of the savagery of battle. Although the wire was added later, this piece of shot was lodged in this man's leg for perhaps 2 months before he died.
These 3 cranial sections show very well how bone responds following trauma. This is a skull section, an entrance wound going to the inner part of the skull. If we look around the fracture margin, there's no bony growth, and we know this man died as a result of this injury. This man lived for a month with this cranial injury. You can see there's some discoloration around the corners of the fracture margin here. If we look on the interior part of the skull, you also have some deposition of new bones called periosteal reaction. You can see some of the gray appearance here. This is new bone that's being laid down during the healing and or infection process. And then if we advance the time even further and go to a similar injury in the cranium, this man lived for 10 years with this injury, a shot fracture injury. You can see there's been very good healing occurring around the site.
Changes in the bones show the effects of one of the soldier's deadliest enemies, infection. This is the upper leg bone of Private Julius Fabre, who was wounded at Deep Bottom, Virginia on the 16th of August in 1864.
He was shot just above the knee would be here, and his limb was amputated the following day on the 17th of August. He lived for 6 years with this femur becoming infected. You can see the change that's occurred. Let me show you a normal femur for comparison. You can see the amount of infection that has set in on this bone.
Later, Fabre required more extensive surgery as the infection spread toward his hip. For archival purposes, the museum routinely photographed amputees alongside their severed limbs. The first extensive medical encyclopedia on military casualties was made possible by these Civil War survivors. But it would take another major war before scientists could begin to put names to soldiers who had died. December 7th, 1941. In the pre-dawn light, Japanese bombers appear out of nowhere. Sirens shriek, bombs explode. Pearl Harbor is destroyed. America is at war. Ironically, a war that took millions of lives would become the greatest boon to the fledgling science of forensic anthropology. World War II was the first war for which our service members had documented health records. By matching skeletal remains against known medical information, scientists were able to gather enough anatomical statistics to understand the life history each of us has written in our bones.
During World War II and Korea, we had the first opportunity as a science to really look at some good documented modern samples and develop some new techniques for determining stature and age on these men that were killed during the war. Since we knew who they were positively identified, we could measure the length of a femur or a long bone and plug that into the stature regression formula or make new stature regression formula from that.
Now, with a simple wooden board and a set of mathematical equations, anthropologists could begin to piece together profiles of the dead.
This bone is 323 millimeters long, and if we plug that into our stature formula, our regression formula for stature, we know this is a white male. we come up with an estimate of about 67.5 inches, plus or minus an inch on either side. That would be the stature estimate for this individual.
But there are nearly 90,000 Americans from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam whose whereabouts are still unknown. Some of their remains have been recovered but not yet named. Other soldiers exist only as charred and shattered fragments hidden in remote jungles. But these men and women are far from forgotten. The search for their identity is one of the great detective stories in forensic science. More than 2.5 million Americans served in the Vietnam War, the longest war in American history. 58,000 died at an average age of 19. Boys barely out of high school. The ferocious guerrilla combat mangled and mutilated bodies, often beyond recognition. The remains of over 2,100 of these young men never made it back to the United States. Many of the men were buried upon impact at crash sites in the jungles, or their bones lay undiscovered in the foliage, decomposing from the intense, moist, tropical heat. After nearly 20 years in the military, 38-year-old Air Force Major Edward M. Hudgens was preparing to retire when he was sent to Southeast Asia in 1969. At home in Big Spring, Texas, he left behind his wife Mary and their 4 children, Stacy, Wendy, Jeff, and Doug. On March 21st, 1970, 7 months into his tour, Major Hudgens was leading a search and rescue mission flying over Laos when his A-1 aircraft was hit by intense enemy fire. Other pilots saw his plane go into an inverted spin and crash, but they saw no parachute and heard no emergency beeper signals.
There was never any uncertainty as to my husband's death. The uncertainty was not knowing when they were going to bring him back. All we could do was wait for the government to get permission to go in. They were supposed to go into the site one time about 2 years ago, and we were all excited about it, and then there was a change in plans and they could not go in, and I was absolutely devastated. It just tore me apart, and I didn't realize how much I had counted on that.
Mary Hudgens has never remarried. Using her VA benefits, she went back to school, got a job, and raised her 4 children alone.
When other kids my age have lost a parent, they have a cemetery and a gravesite they can go to, and they can commune with their parent, their lost one. We didn't have that.
Hope for the Hudgens family lies thousands of miles away, where scientists they had never met worked to find Ed Hudgens and bring him home. Hawaii's National Cemetery is known as the Punch Bowl. The stairs are flanked by stone walls etched with the names of thousands of soldiers who disappeared in combat, beginning with the Second World War. Nearby at Hickam Air Force Base, the U.S. Army's Central Identification Laboratory, Hawaii, SEALHI for short, is one of the world's leading institutions in forensic science. The soldiers and civilians who work here have pledged that the unaccounted for are not to be forgotten. Currently, over 78,000 men and women are missing or unaccounted for from World War II, 8,100 from Korea, and 2,154 from the Vietnam War. Deputy Commander of SEALHI is retired Colonel Johnny Webb.
Okay, as we prepare to go out to sites to recover service members lost in previous wars, a lot of work has to be accomplished before the teams can actually go out and begin the recovery operations.
Plain metal shelves hold thousands of files. In each folder are the medical and dental records of soldiers missing from the Vietnam War. Today, much of the information has been transferred into a massive computer database.
The real research is done in this room to prepare our teams to go out and do the excavations, as well as to provide the information to the scientific staff to make the individual identifications.
Before SEALHI sends an excavation team into the field, they study the reports from the casualty data section for each missing soldier. They then research any information gathered from outside sources. exact location where a soldier was last seen. SEAL High recovery teams train in Hawaii before excavations begin abroad. A mock demonstration site simulates an A6 series aircraft crash with meticulous detail.
Here we have a lot of pin flags, different colors. Yellow designating wreckage, red designating unexploded ordnance or bombs, and the blue is designating any life support material, things that the pilot was wearing at the time of the incident.
A 12 by 16 meter area is laid out in 4 by 4 meter units, so the team can document where each artifact is found.
We're working at. Into the screen right here where it's been shipped.
Dirt is carefully removed and brought to a sifting station, where it is sorted by hand through a fine mesh screen. The smallest fragment might make the difference in finding a soldier's name. The team is looking for anything that can be identified, either from the aircraft or personnel. Bones, ID tags, or pieces of a life support system.
Pretty badly corroded.
Metal detectors scour the site in hopes of finding scraps from the plane. In the field, the detectors are vitally important, as they also help locate any live ammunition still on the site.
Mostly coral, just this band of red.
Ground-penetrating radar sends radio waves into the Earth, which reflect off buried objects.
Disturbance close to the surface. The surface profile has been disturbed recently. Okay, we have an anomaly. We have metal object.
Different types of materials create colored bands, which helps the team assess the likelihood of a burial.
The first dramatic use is that when we go to Southeast Asia and we have these witnesses to incidents that occurred in the 60s, these people are apt to be old. And what they do, they say, well, yes, I did bury him, I did bury the American, and I buried him somewhere around here, but it's changed. And then they might point to an area, it's a football field in size, you know? Maybe the body's there, maybe it isn't. But I can eliminate vast areas of it within minutes.
After weeks and months of training, men and technology are put to the test in a once forbidden land. The jungles of Vietnam that claimed its victims more than 2 decades ago. The Army's Central Identification Laboratory sends teams all over the world to find the remains of service members who are missing or unaccounted for. Working in some of the world's most remote locations, the teams work tirelessly to ensure that they recover every piece of evidence. But 2 decades after the Vietnam War, crash sites are far from intact. Villagers have scavenged whatever they could find a use for. This piece of wreckage from a downed American airplane is being used as a blade for a plow. And now that plow may be hundreds of miles from where the plane actually went down. SEAL High teams work closely with local villagers who might remember the crash or may have discovered some wreckage. The goal? To try to pinpoint the exact location of the crash.
She said she saw 13 people. She personally counted 13 people that morning.
The team compares the information they receive from the villagers with detailed maps prepared at SEAL High to determine the coordinates of the probable crash site. Global positioning systems fix their exact position as they trek sometimes for miles toward the site. Once the excavation is set up, work begins to find and clear the area of any ammunition. The work requires patience and precision and can be extremely dangerous.
Okay, move on back.
Live 40mm shells litter this C-130 crash site. Once they are located, they have to be carefully removed and carried to a safe distance where they will be disposed of later. Clues at the crash site come in different shapes and sizes. When a plane crashes, artifacts and remains bear the unmistakable scars of the 600-mile-per-hour impact. Large guns are buried by the force of the crash. The plane is literally torn apart. Pieces of the fuselage are scattered in all directions.
Helmet. Microphone flyer's helmet.
Deep in the jungle, another SEAL High scouting team uncovers a button from a flight suit. Then, further digging reveals a remnant of fabric from the suit beneath the dense jungle foliage. In a high-tech war, soldiers are mangled by their machines. Finding an intact skeleton in Vietnam would be inconceivable, so every fragment is a vital clue. The most significant finds are human bones and teeth. All the remains found in Vietnam are brought back to the SEAL High Laboratory in Hawaii for analysis. Sometimes, all the forensic scientists have to work with are mere fragments. From these, they must piece together whether they are human, and if so, the individual's age, race, height, weight, and ultimately, their name. To date, SEAL High has positively identified 570 unaccounted for service members from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and returned the remains to their families. Often, bones arrive with no clear idea of where they came from. Identifying those remains is SEAL High's most difficult task. Many times, several portions of a skeleton arrive at SEAL High, each reported to be the remains of the same missing serviceman. SEAL High anthropologists must try to identify each fragment of bone and determine who it belonged to. When bones cannot be identified by the standard methods, SEAL High turns to DNA testing to analyze the remains. But the test won't work on small bone samples.
I will tell you that this is the only bone fragment on the table that is large enough and in good enough state of preservation, we think, to yield DNA.
Before the bone can be tested, a sample must be cut and measured. Mitochondrial DNA will be extracted from the bone sample and compared to that of a living maternal relative.
What do you think, 5 grams?
5 grams.
We're going to send this sample to AFTL, and in about 4 weeks they should issue a report to us on whether or not they were able to sequence mitochondrial DNA out of this sample.
Before any work begins at the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory outside Washington, D.C., the bone sample must be cataloged and photographed. In the laboratory, before the process of extracting its DNA can begin, the exterior surface of the bone sample is cleaned to remove any contaminants. Then, a 2-gram fragment is washed, dried, and pulverized in a blender. The powder then undergoes a chemical reaction that disrupts the cells and releases the DNA into a liquid solution. This incubates overnight with an enzyme which breaks up the proteins within the cells, leaving purified DNA. Mitch Holland is the branch chief of service in genetics systems.
DNA fingerprinting is just like a fingerprint. What we do is we look along the sequence of the DNA, we analyze those regions, we compare those regions to, say, a suspect, a family member. When we do that comparison, we're looking for inclusions and exclusions. We're looking for matches and non-matches.
Scientists at the Armed Forces Lab have a twofold job: to identify DNA fingerprints from blood samples, and the more complicated task of extracting DNA from remains which may be decades old. In order to match the DNA fingerprint of a missing soldier, the scientists must test it against a blood sample which has been mailed to the Institute by a maternal relative. The process of extracting DNA from old skeletal remains is such a significant advance in biological science that in 1993, one of its creators, Dr. Kary Mullis, earned a Nobel Prize. Scientists had known of DNA since the 19th century, but the mysterious nucleic acid structure was not known until the 20th century. In 1962, James Watson and Francis Crick won the Nobel Prize for uncovering DNA's 3-dimensional molecular structure. There are 2 types of DNA: nuclear DNA, which is found only in the cell's nucleus, and mitochondrial DNA, found in the surrounding mitochondria. The first type is not as plentiful as the second, which can endure in bones for thousands of years after death. In both varieties, DNA resembles a twisting ladder with cross rungs composed of adenine, thymine, and cytosine, or A, T, G, and C for short. The prints in DNA fingerprinting are pieces of A, T, G, and C of varying lengths and arrangements. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited only from the mother. Therefore, people related along maternal lines share identical patterns in their A's, C's, G's, and T's that non-related people probably would not. A match indicates a high probability of identification, but in and of itself is not 100% conclusive. To have a large enough sample to work with, scientists are able to reproduce or copy the DNA in a machine called a thermocycler, which synthesizes millions of exact copies of the DNA within a few hours. The process is known as a polymerase chain reaction. The sample is then carefully loaded onto a gel through which an electric current is passed. Ultraviolet light helps visualize the individual bars of DNA. Then, several samples are loaded onto what is known as a sequencing gel, one sample per lane. The sample is then read by a laser, which runs back and forth across it several hundred times a minute. The information is then converted into a peak, which can be translated into an A, G, T, or C. When compared to the family reference sample, if the sequences are identical, they are considered a probable match. Over the years, remains alleged to be those of Ed Hudgens came to Seal High 4 times. Once from an unknown source, once from a Laotian native, and twice from his known crash site. The bone tested for DNA was from the Laotian source and was clearly ruled out by the lab tests. But some of the bones acquired from the unknown source aligned with fragments from the crash site. These can be certified as belonging to Hudgens. Artifacts at the site found near Ed's remains included his watch, a buckle from his seat harness, a dog tag chain, and a dime. An American coin deep in a faraway jungle. But it would be a single tooth, not much bigger than the dime he carried in his pocket, which provided the pivotal clue the scientists sought.
Looks pretty good.
When the cases come into the Seal High laboratory, if there are dental remains, they are studied by forensic odontologists. They look for any unique characteristics which would help match the tooth to a missing soldier.
In this tooth, we see a root canal. In other words, the tooth had the insides removed and was filled with paste. And that matches very closely with what we see in the postmortem x-rays. Other fillings that are easy to match are these single fillings on the lower teeth, here and here, as well as this series of fillings on the upper teeth. And so this is a good example of when we have enough evidence to work with, both ante-mortem and post-mortem, about how closely we can match the dental records.
Teeth are x-rayed and the information is directly input into a huge database of dental records.
This represents the post-mortem image that we just took from the tooth.
All the dental records of people missing from Southeast Asia and Korea are kept on file. The forensic odontologist enters the specific details of the tooth that has been found into the computer and begins to make a match by checking the tooth against the information in the records.
This patient had fillings on a couple of teeth in the top right side.
The computer checks the characteristics of this single tooth against the thousands of records in its memory. Each time it eliminates a record, it moves closer to finding a match. The forensic odontologist enters more information, and the computer eliminates all but 4 records. This tooth could belong to one of 4 missing men. One more piece of information remains. This molar had a small filling in the bottom right quadrant. This information eliminates all the records but 1. The team has made a match.
Can you take this down to casualty data and tell them that we have a pretty good hit on CAPME and I'd like to take a look at the record?
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Only a few hundred bone fragments, most less than ½ an inch in size, and 1 tooth can be said with certainty to belong to Ed Hudgens. For the family, it is enough. Whether transporting tiny, unidentified bone fragments from an excavation site to a lab in Hawaii, or finally sending a soldier with a name home to his loved ones, Seal High treats all remains with utmost respect.
Forward, hurt!
National Cemetery, the ritual is repeated every hour, 365 days of the year. Fallen heroes forever honored, yet forever unnamed and unknown. But one hero, once among the missing, has finally been found. He comes to eternal rest with a name, full military honors, and a Purple Heart. For Mary Hudgens and her children, Ed Hudgens' journey cannot be measured in years nor calculated in miles.
He lay in a jungle for 26 years, and we now have put him to rest and with honors, and his fellow countrymen have honored him, and it brings it to a conclusion for us.
"26 years to the day after Ed Hudgens' plane crashed in the jungles of Southeast Asia, his children lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns. Dozens of scientists around the world have worked toward this day. Piece by piece, clue by clue, they have unraveled a mystery that tormented a family for more than a quarter century. The final chapter in this soldier's story has been written. A family is reunited. An incomplete circle is, at long last, closed. Ed Hudgens has come home. In Fairfax County, Virginia, police find a decomposed body, but have no report of a crime. In Fort Myers, Florida, a killer confesses to a grisly crime, but the police cannot find a body. A serial killer may go free unless police find the evidence to put him behind bars. In each case, forensic scientists must find proof of the crime in the bones of the murder victim, using scientific studies of human decay to find out when the victim died so the killer may be traced, hoping to prove there is no perfect crime. That dead men do talk. December 1993. In a wooded area near Washington, D.C., a surveyor has made a gruesome discovery. While mapping out a new suburb in the Virginia countryside, he has stumbled on a body buried in a shallow grave. Officers from the Fairfax County Police Department arrive at the secluded area where the body had been found. The first homicide detective on the scene is Detective Jerry Farrell.
How you doing, Officer Gregory? What do you got? 52 missed call right over here. Okay. Take a look.
The police assume it's a homicide, but there are no immediate clues to help identify the victim.
And Lieutenant Wilson, if he's there, you want to take a look? What you're going to need is start mapping out the area. Secure this area here, and then we're going to need at least 50-foot area perimeter set up around this one.
The team of investigators will search a wide area. Scavengers have dragged parts of the body away. The police meticulously document the position of the body with photographs, sketches, and notes. Detective Dennis Wilson heads the Cold Case Squad, investigating crimes where the trail of evidence has gone cold.
far as similar crimes.
In such cases, every clue, every piece of evidence, no matter how small, may be the key to solving the crime.
Involved in the murders of a couple of prostitutes in an adjoining county. How many core samples do you think
Bits of clothing and hair, detectives Wilson and Farrell are fairly sure the victim is a woman. Since decomposition often leaves fatty residues, the officers take soil samples near the body. Chemical analysis could help determine when the victim was buried.
Well, you only have one chance at a crime scene, and you have to do it right the first time. So you slow things down at that point. There's no hurry. The body's obviously been there for some time. We're going to try to gather all the evidence we can and make sure we don't miss anything. There just may be one small little clue here that's going to lead to either her identity or the identity of the perpetrator.
Because the body is so badly decomposed, the detectives make a call to nearby Washington, D.C. Dr. Douglas Owsley of the Smithsonian Institution is an anthropologist whose specialty is identifying human remains, from soldiers who died in the Civil War to the modern-day victims of homicide. He has testified in many criminal trials as a forensic scientist. Forensic meaning science used as proof in a court of law. Receiving the call from the Fairfax County Police, he agrees to visit the site where the skeleton has been found. In the usual case, murder victims are assigned to medical examiners who dissect the body to find the cause of death. But medical examiners are accustomed to dealing with fresh bodies. Here, only bones are left to tell the tale, requiring the special skills of the anthropologist. It takes 3 days of careful excavation to take the body from the ground. Back in his laboratory, Owsley hunts for signs of the victim's age, sex, and the manner of death. It is immediately apparent that the victim is female. The pelvic bone is wider in females to accommodate childbirth. Though Owsley believes the victim was a young adult, it's difficult to be more precise.
She does not show any signs of arthritis, not severe arthritis. If you look at her spinal column, there's only minor changes, no development of arthritis. Her pubic bones are showing a stage of maturity that would be consistent with somebody that is about 30 years of age. And
in a young person, the sutures of the skull are plainly visible.
This is a very general aging indicator, but in a young
As a person grows older, the sutures tend to fuse together.
and so in her cranium,
In the victim's skull, the sutures are starting to disappear, confirming that the victim was a young adult. Only 5 feet 1 inch tall, she'd been stabbed repeatedly. The knife blade leaving marks on the collarbone, ribs, and vertebrae.
looking at the pattern of cuts in the bone, you can tell that the individual was behind her at least some of the time. She has knife wounds that penetrated in the back and the midline. The cut that is in the clavicle and the collarbone. There's many different positions that could account for that, but one would be the individual reaching over her.
Attaching a name to the body will not be easy. To shed more light on this mysterious case, police must determine the identity of the victim. In Fort Myers, Florida, police will have the opposite problem. A crime without a body.
911, what is your emergency? Yeah. Okay, 1 moment, sir. Betty, I have a man on the phone advised he just murdered someone.
In a police communication center in Fort Myers, Florida, a 911 call will lead to the discovery of a grisly crime dating to 1989.
911, what is your emergency? I'd like to report a homicide on Piney Road. Murder, where did it happen? And you did it?
Yeah. The caller reports a murder he has recently committed.
Why did you do that?
He says he's thought of turning himself in, but hasn't decided yet.
Are you going to wait there for us?
The 911 call is traced to a shopping center phone booth. The operator tries to keep the killer on the line, while a message goes out to police units in the area.
Lake County 211-265, a possible signal fired at Coral Gate Shopping Center, or Orange Grove and Pondella.
Officer Paul Rose monitors the call and finds no one at the shopping center phone booth where the call originated. But less than a mile from the shopping center, he has spotted a possible suspect. The suspect side of the road, away from the direction of the shopping center. The suspect, whose name is Paul Klein, quickly admits he made the 911 call confessing murder. He is advised of his rights and taken into custody. The previous night, he'd broken into a house and strangled an elderly woman on the couch where she lay. There is no sign of anything missing. Robbery had not been the motive.
That he not only had
Lieutenant Jeff Taylor, entering the house, found the victim just as Klein had described her. But he would soon find out that she had not been Klein's first victim.
Klein related to me that he heard voices, and the voices made him become angry. And every time he became angry, he had to kill someone. And when he said that, it indicated to me that perhaps there were other victims also. And I asked him at that time if he had killed before, and he said yes, twice.
Klein had murdered one other woman in a trailer some months before. But his first victim had been a friend named Danny Webster, killed a year and a half earlier in August 1989. Luring Webster into a field to look for aluminum cans, Klein had beaten him to death with a lead pipe. A crime scene search unit scours the area where the killing allegedly occurred.
There you go, I got something over here.
Oh, yeah? Does it look like it's been there a while, or?
We had information that we believed at the time that the crime was committed, the original act of the homicide was committed in this field. So what we did a grid search of this whole field, and upon doing that, we located a shoe. It's early to tell right now if it actually belongs to the victim, but we believe there's a good possibility that it does. Therefore, once we found the shoe, we have to treat it as evidence.
According to Klein's confession, he had returned to the scene of the crime 3 days after the murder. Arriving at night to avoid detection, he swam with the body to a marshy swamp island, where he dismembered the corpse with an axe and a paring knife. After disposing of Webster's body so thoroughly and getting away with his crime for a year and a half, Klein has now decided to confess. The crime scene search officers find a small piece of bone, photographed exactly where it is found. But they will not find a body. Without a body, police do not have enough evidence to convict. Detective Jack Shell interrogated Klein under tight security. Klein had once bent a stop sign with his bare hands.
We needed a positive identification of the body. Although we had somebody telling us who they killed and that they killed him, we still have to prove who was killed, how they were killed, and when they were killed, to the best we can. It's the corpus delicti, the body of the crime. We have to be able to establish that, yes, this person died, and that this person did it.
I guess I must have actually hit him about, I don't know, maybe more than 200 times. I'm not sure. I just kept whacking at everything on my head, my legs, arms, everywhere I could get. This is head reason was more, or I actually had more anything. But that was after he was already dead, too, and I just kept hitting.
Klein's confession by itself is not enough to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. The police must find the body. Klein pointed out the marshy island where he says he left the dismembered corpse. But even if police can find it, it will be hard to identify after a year and a half in the swamp. The case will go to Dr. William Maples of the University of Florida, a world-renowned authority on the identification of skeletal remains. In 1991, he led the team that exhumed the bones of President Zachary Taylor, who died mysteriously in 1850. Some historians say Taylor was poisoned, making him, not Abraham Lincoln, the first American president to be assassinated. After testing the dead president's hair and fingernails for poison, Dr. Maples laid the body and the assassin theories to rest. In the case of Paul Klein, it is is immediately clear to Maples he is dealing with a possible psychopath totally unaffected by death.
Well, bodies in Florida tend to bloat very rapidly. Florida is known for its sunshine and good weather, especially in the area of Fort Myers where this took place. So the first thing that our killer attempted to use was a paring knife. It is very flexible, it is light, it may be sharp, it may be serrated, and may be very, very effective sometimes in cutting up bones. The so-called Ginsu steak knife is amazingly flexible and yet will go right through bone if it's properly used. So our killer sticks the knife into this bloated body and outpours all over him yellow and green discharge, foul-smelling fluid. This is enough to really disturb anyone, even if they weren't disturbed to start with.
But the killer's use of a paring knife may be the key to identifying the victim's remains and corroborating Klein's confession.
If we take a paring knife and rub along a stick or a bone or whatever the case might be, you notice that the blade jumps and chatters. This chatter produces an interrupted type of cutting on the bone surface. And we look for this evidence of chattering, and that tells us how flexible or inflexible the blade is. On the other hand, if we take a good heavy-bladed sharp knife and cut on the bone, it doesn't chatter, it simply shaves the bone. And this is evidence of a heavier, less flexible blade.
Crime scene search officers arrive at the island where Klein left the dismembered body. If they can find bones that were sliced with a paring knife, they'll have strong proof that Klein's confession is real.
Hey, Chris. We're gonna earn this one. We're gonna earn this one.
Klein was to have accompanied the officers himself, but in the boat going over to the island, he'd been much too excited at the prospect of seeing his victim's remains. For their own safety, the officers decided to search without Klein's assistance. It's a serious mission, for unlike his other crimes, the murder of Danny Webster was vicious enough to send Klein to Florida's electric chair, or else prove beyond all doubt he's a dangerous psychopath to be put away indefinitely.
He seemed like a normal person. You didn't notice any psychological problems or anything, but the more it went on and the more I realized he was telling me the truth and that these gory facts he was telling me really did happen, then I'm beginning to think, we got a real weirdo here that can do this and talk about it so calmly and so intelligently.
Klein had a nickname he didn't like. Because his arms extended out from his body as he walked, kids made fun of him, calling him Popeye. He'd killed Danny Webster for calling him names, repeating time after time it was because Webster had harassed him.
How are you feeling? I'm feeling pretty good. Everything's all right. I just have to go ahead and, I don't know, I think I feel almost a little dizzy for that matter. I eat a little bit of something, take my medication.
Is that person in March, Danny Webster?
Yes, ma'am. Yep, that's him. Or not, what's him? He was always being trolling, I don't know, calling me names and stuff. And hey, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate everything.
The island where Klein left the body is partially submerged and subject to changing tides. The logistics of finding evidence are very difficult. Finally, more bones are found. The body is in pieces, just as Klein had said.
How did you take this body apart? Libby's response was just like I always do. I took off the left leg, the left arm, the head, the right arm, the right leg, in a circular motion like that. And he used a hatchet, axe. He told me where the axe was, which was in another state. Him and his father had went to their home in another state and left it there before he came back.
Pieces of bone found on the marshy island are sent to the FBI for examination. The FBI confirms that the bones show evidence of hatchet trauma. An axe or hatchet had been used to cut the body apart. But according to his harrowing confession, Klein had reserved special treatment for the victim's head.
Yeah, Yip got his head off with a paring knife, and the head, there was more or less like in pieces, and I tossed it right on an embankment about 25, 30 feet from the mangroves, and I stuck it there for like, I had it there for like the longest time, I guess something like 3.5 months.
He told me that he took the head and kept it to come back and visit it. He would visit it every night and talk to it. And after about 2 weeks, it got to the point where it was deteriorated to the extent he didn't want it anymore, so he discarded it.
Klein had carried the head around with him in a paper sack, often engaging it in conversation. Spotting a police car on one occasion, he panicked and threw the head into a waterway, but he could not remember where. A police dive team searches the area where Klein may have discarded Danny Webster's skull. It is an area of murky waters, frequented by alligators. They find nothing but coconuts. Unless the head is found, it may be impossible to identify the remains as those of Danny Webster. Here, as in suburban Virginia, the police must team up with science to bring a killer to justice. At the Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., tourists gaze at the wonders of the natural world. They are unaware that a few feet away, a storage area holds the unnatural work of a vicious killer. Police in Fairfax County, Virginia, have called on forensic scientist Doug Owsley to help identify the victim of a brutal homicide. The body has decomposed. Only a skeleton remains. Owsley has determined that the victim was a female from 27 to 34 years old. She died from repeated stab wounds. But who is she, and where did she come from?
When you're working with police cases and working on problems with human identification, often when the remains come into the laboratory or when you're involved in the recovery, the identification follows very quickly. There's someone that's missing. There are records that can be obtained, dental records or medical records that you can compare against, and you can get that person identified within a very short period of time. Okay. All right. Well, if we can help, let's try.
But police in Fairfax County have found no immediate links to a missing person.
What's your phone number?
Owsley will need every piece of evidence he can find to produce a life history of the victim, to be matched, hopefully, with someone who disappeared as many as 6 years before. Personal effects found with the victim are minimal. An inexpensive hair clip, a hair pick. Her blue jeans had rotted away. Her synthetic underwear remained. Lightweight sandals indicate that the crime was committed in warm weather.
Her hair was a light brown color, as determined from analysis of hair found at the site. We know that her fingernails were painted from fingernails that were recovered at the site. It was a dark glossy pink in color. So there's a lot of details.
On the earrings found near the body is a fragment of human tissue. The metal of the earring had protected it from bacterial decay. The earrings are included in sketches distributed nationwide. Slowly, painfully, the haunting details of the victim's life are coming into focus. In the spinal column are signs of trauma. Depressions in the vertebra are evidence that the discs between the vertebrae have herniated. The victim may have held a job that required heavy lifting. She'd once taken care of her teeth, but in the last years of her life had allowed them to decay. She had fillings on the front teeth to maintain her appearance, but 5 of her molars are missing. Black stains on the teeth are evidence the victim was probably a smoker.
Overall, the impression that you would have, but it's an impression based not only on the dentition, but perhaps some of the things found with it. It would suggest that it was an individual that did not have a lot of money, that fairly limited financial resources.
The information gleaned by Owsley is passed on to the Fairfax County Police Department, where Detective Bruce Guth heads the homicide branch.
In our jurisdiction, many of the murders are committed by people who know the victim.
In the normal case, once the victim is known, the police will talk to neighbors and relatives about the victim's lifestyle, who her friends were, and her enemies. A chain of evidence often will lead to the guilty party.
At that point. In this case, we don't know the identity, so it makes it difficult to really go much further till we know who it is.
Detail by detail, Fairfax County Police re-examine the evidence found at the scene. A sketch of what the victim may have looked like is distributed to police across the country, along with other details of the case.
Even though this case is 2 years old, I'm still actively pursuing leads that have occurred. I receive inquiries approximately 2 to 3 a month. Just recently, I received one from Philadelphia, New York City, and Ohio.
Despite the continuing efforts of the Fairfax County Police, there is no matchup of the murder victim with a missing person. To facilitate the search for the victim's identity, Doug Owsley provides data for a second composite sketch using an FBI computer program.
When you look at a skull and you're trying to assess what this individual looked like, the basic form is going to be defined by the skull itself. In relation to that, then you take into consideration the clothing that's found, for instance, because the clothing helps you gain an idea as to the size, the weight of the individual, for instance.
Starting with an image of the skull, the computer adds successive layers of detail. Markers indicate the probable thickness of facial tissue. The measurements are based on population studies of similar age and gender. Hair found at the scene, along with the plastic hair clip and hair pick, suggest a possible hairstyle. The victim had an overbite, a gap in her front teeth, and a cosmetic filling. Since these features would have been visible in life, the victim is shown smiling in the final illustration. But despite the pains taken to create a lifelike image, there is still no response when the image is published nationwide. Part of the problem, the police are still unsure when the murder occurred. When discovered in 1993, the bones had been dry. The flesh had long since rotted away.
You'd have to say that it would be at least a year and a half before that this could have happened. But in reality, I think it could extend back further in time. And so if we take the maximum range, one of the things found in a pocket was a quarter that dates to 1980. So looking at the time frame, we're in terms of the extremes, probably talking between 1991 and 1980.
The problem of dating murder victims found long after the crime has occurred may soon have an answer. At a body farm in Tennessee, an unusual study is underway, using the volunteered flesh and bones of the dead. In Fairfax County, Virginia, police continue their search for clues to identify a woman found in the Washington suburbs. In Fort Myers, Florida, a confessed serial killer has led police to a headless body, barely identifiable as human. In both cases, work done at the Tennessee Anthropology Research Facility, or TARF, will prove invaluable. Its director is Dr. William Bass, a forensic anthropologist at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. His expertise is the human skeleton.
Individual who'd been dead about 10 days found up on the edge of the river.
When a person is recently dead, morphological features such as prints on the fingers and palms can help with